Upping your life and moving to a new part of the world is a tale as old as time. In fact, some studies show that it all began nearly 2 million years ago when some early humans, feeling adventurous, left Africa and overstayed their tourist visas in Eurasia. #YOLO. Last year, it's estimated that 184 million people lived outside the country they were born in. But why? Well, I'm Chris Russell.
And I'm Rob Orme.
And we want to know why people uproot their lives and move to a new part of the world. We want to explore what impacts the decision to leave has, not only on their lives, but also on the lives of those they love and care for the most. This is Here and Air. Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Here and Air, a podcast about why we leave. Brought to you by the Wagon Wheel Pub in Ballincarrigy, County Westmeath. It's the weekend after St. Patrick's weekend in here at the moment, and I imagine the Wagon Wheel was bouncing off its tits yesterday, and everyone would have been having a great old time supping down pints of Guinness. So lots of love to Jerry and Phil for continuing to support the podcast. I'm Chris. I'm broadcasting to you from actually a genuinely sunny London, England today.
And I'm Rob, and I'm coming to you from a very overcast Sydney.
Today's episode, the proper stuff, is about families and the impacts that you and I have had on our poor families by moving around the world and doing all the fun stuff we like to do.
Yeah, well,
where do we want to start? Do you want to kick things off?
Yes.
You always come to these things a bit more prepared than I do.
hell surprise.
Someone's a SWAT. It's not me.
What? Failing to prepare is preparing to fail. You know that. Well, let's start with something. Let's ease you into the bathwater. What was when we mentioned it in previous episodes, but when you first made that decision to leave home, not necessarily when you went to Scotland, but certainly when you left the British Isles, what was your family's reaction to
that? It was interesting. Like, it was fairly positive, all of, because I've been away for I don't know, 6-7 years by the time I decided to go to Dubai. Maybe even more. So it was all relatively positive. I think, there's a bit of nervousness that they wouldn't see me as much. But it was it was positive. I mean, they were all happy for me that I was going to go do something outside the box and do something a little bit different. I do remember, though, that was the kind of start of a period of time where when you'd come home and then you'd leave, you'd notice that people were much more upset when you were leaving. Very big difference to just jumping over the Irish Sea and coming back to the UK. People definitely thought you were you were going somewhere, and that obviously that extended in Australia. But I would say overall a very, very positive, and I think that's just because I think that is in part because I'd been away for a period of time, and I kind of got used to that idea of me not being around all the time, and just being kind of thereabouts sporadically, even if it was only over in the UK. But yours must have been different, though, right? Because you were a lot younger, and you went to the other side of the world straight away.
I did. I was just thinking as you were talking, I was like, I'm trying to remember, because it was 13 years ago. My brain doesn't work quite as well these days. But I remember the reaction was, okay, yes, we understand. I think, funnily enough, the reaction in more recent years has probably been more uncomfortable, I would say, and more noteworthy than it was when I first left. I think when I first left, it was a case of them thinking that I was going on holiday. I think that they looked at it as he'll be back soon enough. I think my friends, on the other hand, were very different, but my family certainly were like, yeah, cool, this will be a year, 2 years at the most, and we'll have him back. And for me, I never really put a time frame on it. I knew that I wanted to come over here and live for an extended period of time. I in no way had ideas on becoming a permanent resident and then becoming a citizen. That all kind of happened quite naturally and just part of the course. But here I am. And I think now that I've been here and established myself and have networks of friends, professional and personal, I fundamentally love it here. Like, I think the lifestyle here suits me better than it does in foggy London town. No offense. I think that their reaction to me being over here has been one of almost disinterest. I think that they've almost like given me less in recent years because they sort of see it as, well, you're too far away, you're in another country, you what's the point of going above and beyond for you because your life is over there. And that's quite tough to deal with sometimes. You want to still feel part of it. I've got nephews who are growing up, and my sister's pretty good with it, but certainly from a parental point of view, they've definitely sort of edged away from being or sharing information about what they're up to and when they're doing it and things like that. I feel like the contact there is very sporadic.
Do you think that's a do you think that's an intentional thing, or do you think that's just a natural thing that happens when you're so far when you're out of the picture and you're not around, as around? Because I kind of feel the same, but I don't think on my side, like I don't think for me it's intentional. I think I'm just not. I haven't been there, and it's when stuff is happening or kind of things have gone on. And sorry, I'm hijacking your answer here, but when things are going on, I've found that it's probably just I'm in bed and things are going on during their day and they haven't communicated it with me. Is that how you feel, or do you think it's
Look, I don't know. I've queried and questioned that for years. I think given how good technology is these days and how easy it is to still maintain contact with people on the other side of the world, I think that it's a lazy option just to let those relationships fizzle. I think that you have every opportunity, and like, it's frustrating because the we don't know what time it is over there argument always comes up, and the oh, WhatsApp doesn't always work argument usually floats to the surface. So that it's pretty consistent in terms of excuse making. So I think that there's a part of it that is proximity and distance, but I look at the way in which, say, other friends who've been over here any similar duration of time to myself have relationships with their friends and family back home, and it's a completely different experience. Like, it's a question of priority as well, and if the value that they get on my side of the fence isn't good enough for them to do a quick Google search or actually figure out how to set up WhatsApp on their phone, then that's totally fine. I totally understand. Like, they're living their lives and I'm living mine. So, like, it's a question of priority. And yeah.
well, Rob, we actually have a special surprise here because your mum was actually on the line, and we're gonna have words there. um, no, mate. Look, I get that and I understand that. I think. Um, has that been a recent like when did that when did you start noticing that, and were you bothered by it, or are you bothered by it?
COVID was a good time for self-reflection. And during that period of time, we're all quite isolated, quite a lot of time on our hands. That reciprocal checking in with one another didn't feel like it was really there for me. And I think at that time I was like, actually, do you know what? I've spent the best part of a decade trying to encourage my parents to come over to come and see the life that I've built for myself here, to appreciate why I'm here. And it's kind of largely fallen on deaf ears, and they're just not interested. Like they're like, it's the UK with slightly better weather. So I sort of made my peace with it and said to myself, do you know what? Like, I'm not going anywhere. They know where I am. And if they fancy coming over, they're more than welcome to. But it meant that an enormous weight was lifted off my shoulders because for a long time I'd been carrying around this weight of almost being like pandering to them and being like, look how good it is, look how amazing Australia is, look how cool it is. And then not having that meant that I could settle into being more, part of my community, more part of my where I'm living and what I'm doing. So in a strange way, it actually really alleviated all the stresses and strains that I was feeling of being so far away. And yeah, of course, like and in a strange way, because I changed my attitude, I actually think it improved my relationship with my parents as well, because I wasn't going to them and being like, hey, why aren't you coming out? Like, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? It was actually quite beneficial.
How many? So you 13 years in Australia. How many times have you been home in those 13 years?
Good question. I would say, um, yeah, maybe 7 or 8 times.
That's not a lot.
That's more than 50% though. That's more than like it's every other year. Initially, it was a lot. Like I went back a lot, and then you've also got COVID in there as well. So I think
Yeah.
given like so, if you said 13 years less, effectively 3 years for COVID, um, having and also having not have having had a fallow year the year before COVID, so I lost out a year there of going back. I would say, yeah, index is quite high for me. I think that's still quite a lot.
I'm
And
not. I'm not saying It's not a lot for you, but I'm saying over in 13 years to essentially see your family 7 times, it's not a lot. I mean, your cadence is much higher than mine when I was out there. I didn't go home. I went home twice, I think.
yeah,
I planned to go more times, but twice in 6 years or 5.5 years, whatever it was.
we've
Um,
spoken about it at great length, haven't we? Around the idea of although you are only seeing them for that condensed period of time, it's actually I find it better. I find that my family are much more on point when I go home now than they ever were when I actually lived 5 minutes down the road. I find that the quality time that I can have with them when I go back is much more enjoyable than the, you know, popping over on a Sunday time because it's just kind of taken for granted. Whereas going back now is a bit of an event, means something to them, means something to me, got something to look forward to, and you know that it's going to come to an end. So I actually think that there's something quite nice about that. What do you
yeah, I
think?
mean, I feel the same, to be honest. I haven't been back for 6 months now, and I've been home a couple of times. I do feel like, yeah, when I came home, and when I came home on holiday from Australia or Dubai even, like you were home, and like that was your period of time at the home, and you were there for a month usually, and you would do lots of things, and not only just being my mum and going to stay, hanging out with family, but also just like being in Ireland. Like it's probably, to be honest, one of the I've actually fell in love with Ireland when I lived away, because had enough money when I came home, as opposed to when I left, to go and do the nice things in Ireland and go and be a tourist in Ireland and stay in the nice hotels, go to nice restaurants, see the nice, you drive, up the nice parts and kind of do lots of nice stuff. And every trip home, even though it was actually only two, well, three of them, if you include Dubai, was full of like really beautiful parts of Ireland and fun things. And you'd fit the family in for 3 days. You'd do a trip here. You do something over here with them here. You do something over here, and it was like, okay, what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we doing? Everybody's making an effort. Everyone's kind of turning up, um, and I really enjoyed that. And then the caveat is you have to leave, and that's horrible. Um, but I think since I've been back, whilst I've enjoyed being able to nip home and see everybody, and there's less of that strain from okay, well, I'm leaving now. It's like, all right, see ya. A couple of weeks ago, I popped back for a day. I was literally there for 24 hours. But I was a bit like, all right, cool. Well, I'm just now here. I'm just now kind of, um, we're not doing anything. We're just like we're around, and the brother would come down and we'd hang out and we go to pub and whatever. And again, it's very nice, but it's just you're again you're part of the furniture, and maybe I don't know, maybe it's a neat kind of an ego thing. I don't know, but um, I think everything you kind of just said is really interesting because I feel in the time that I've been away, I've not I wouldn't say my relationship has been damaged. I think the relationship is really good with most of my family members. Um, but I am disconnected to things. Like things would happen and family dramas and kind of things that would go on, and I wouldn't be around to be part of it. And I guess there's ultimately kind of pros and cons to that. Um, I don't have to deal with the bullshit. Didn't have to deal with the bullshit that was going on, or kind of, if there's some stuff good happening. But then at the same time, you kind of feel like a little bit of a stranger to your unit,
Mm.
uh, and to your family, and there's only so many times you go, oh, what's everybody up to? Not much. Okay, cool. Not much this week. Is it? Okay, cool. That's what it is. Um, but yeah, so kind of very similar to you in terms of that's how I felt, but I've always felt like it was a distance thing. Yeah, I think for me, yes, there is, it's easy to jump on a call and jump on a video call or whatever. We just never did it very often. Like I'd ring them, but I would never, very very rarely do video calls. I'd often ring them drunk. They'd often get a phone call from me at 3 o'clock in the morning. They'd be like, "Oh, who am I gonna ring? Gonna ring me mom. It's 2 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There, she'll love this. She'll have a great time now. Hello." Then I get a phone call, like I get a text message like 3 days later. Do you remember speaking to us? No, don't. I think I'm a raging alcoholic, just ringing them drunk all the time. But like, no, you got to understand, your 10 a.m. is my 11 p.m. It's very different. Not fair. So I get less of that, and I don't know if they don't. I don't know if they missed that or not. I haven't explored that with them, in too great detail. Um, you had you have a couple of nephews or nephew and niece.
Yeah, I got a couple of my sister Fiona has two boys, 5 and 1. They're
Five,
not
five
called,
and one.
yeah, 5 and 1. They're not called 5 and 1.
Did they have names?
Yeah, they
True.
do. Oscar and Teddy. Oscar's
I
5 years old.
I prefer I prefer 5 and 1 to be honest.
Yeah, 5 and 1.
Um, when I guess Oscar was born, um, how did that how did that impact you and your being away?
Well, funnily enough, I had planned to go back. I arrived about 24 hours after Oscar was born. Um, Wanted to make sure that I was around and got to experience the thrill of becoming an uncle. So I very much planned to be in the UK at that time. Um, it was certainly different for Teddy, who came along just over a year ago. I was like, yeah, I think you've got it at this point. You'll be all right.
But
Hold for
that's it. Like the first one, I've got a nephew as well, right? And he was born a couple of years ago, and yeah, I felt the same. Because it was part of the reason I wanted to go home was to kind of hang out with my nephew a little bit more. Um, and I think that dynamic is, yeah, I'm interested to kind of hear your kind of how that I guess impacted you. But you went home straight away, so you were there for the first little bit of it. Did it make leaving harder?
At that point, I think it did, yeah. And I think around that time, I was feeling obviously quite distant. And I was like, oh my God, yes, this is what I need to do. I need to have a child. This'll be good for me, yes. So it very much skewed my perspective on things for a wee while there. But I'm pleased to say I came out the other side unscathed and didn't make any rash decisions. But I think it made me think about this idea of like support systems. Certainly from the perspective of, like always like when you're home, you've got a network of people that you can be like, hey, I need this or I require X. Can you facilitate? Whereas when you live 30,000 plus kilometers away, those conversations are much harder because you're reliant on friends mainly. I'm lucky in the fact that my stepbrother lives over here and my cousin lives over here. So that's kind of cool. But it's not the same. It's not the same dynamic as having your sister and your mum and your dad, like on your doorstep, ready to pick up the slack if you're having, a tough time with a child or whatever. What about what do you think about support systems? Like how did you deal with that when you were over here? How did you go about coping with the lack of, people just to immediately pull on when you were in times of need?
Man, I'm Irish. We don't speak about our feelings to our family. It wasn't a problem. If anything, it's more difficult now. Oh, you got feelings, have you? No, geez, outside. Go outside. Go outside of the house. No, no feelings in here.
Outside.
No, but we'll have a pint. We'll have a pint. Jesus, stop crying, will you? Will you stop crying at your pint, will you? For fuck's sake. Genuinely, we don't really talk about feelings in my family. We assume we all have them, but we prefer if we kept them to ourselves. Um, it wasn't a problem for me. I think when I came to Sydney, I hung around with a few people and who, like yourself, like I guess Ethan and our good German friend Marco, people who are much more attuned with their feelings and probably a bit more emotionally mature in the sense that they don't mind telling you if they've had a bad day, but that probably helped me in the sense of the there would I could chat to them if I wanted to, or if I need to kind of go chat to somebody. So it was never really a problem, to be honest. So yeah, it was never really a. If anything, I learned, just I guess from support systems and kind of the emotional side of things, I just always had really good friends, and I've got friends who in Sydney who I've known since school, so there was always a kind of a. It's interesting you kind of you talk about your stepbrother and cousins. Um, I kind of feel the same way about my mate Jamie who lives in Sydney. Like if it was something really wrong, like you had an old friend or you have somebody who's kind of known you a long time that you could have a conversation with. But I was lucky enough to again just I had mates that if I needed to talk to them, and then they kind of made it easier. Um, but yeah, I don't know my relationship with my family. We don't really. I'm joking about it. I was joking about it at the top, but like genuinely, we don't really talk about our feelings with each other. It's more like but I think that's an old school Irish thing. I think we're
Yeah.
getting. I think as a species, we're getting better at it. Um, I think Gen Z won't shut up talk about their fucking feelings. But I think we're getting better at it. And I think um, we probably that's probably been reflective in some of the conversations I've had maybe a bit more recently with my family since I've got back and stuff. But
Just thinking about the idea of, you mentioned the word home, and that got me thinking about how you define that. Like, is that because, like, for me, it's quite difficult. I don't necessarily see, when I refer to home, I'm referring to Sydney and just, living here and being my life. But I don't know if that's necessarily like in my mind, I'm not necessarily like, that's categorically where my home is. But equally, back in the UK, my parents have moved around so much that neither of them are in the places that I grew up in. So that doesn't feel like home either. What about, like, how do you feel about that? Like I'm sort of like I'm torn around that idea of home. Might be a bit easier for yourself with the parents still being, in the general vicinity of where you grew up.
mate, that's a great question. I honestly don't know. Um, that's part of it. I was only actually having this conversation with my mum over the weekend. Um, since I've been back probably for the first time in my life, I missed somewhere, and I missed Australia, and that's never I never missed Ireland, really. Um, so I never had that kind of thing that I missed Ireland. I missed Ireland. There was times when I did miss Ireland. With things that would happen, or certainly Paddy's Day or Six Nations or whatever. But it was
Mm.
never felt time that I felt, oh, I miss Ireland. I'm homesick. I want to go home. And there's part of me that thinks I'll never live in Ireland again. Um, like I don't see me living there. I don't know why. I just don't really see it. Um, but I still Ireland's home. And Mullingar's not, Mullingar's home, but also like just generally as a concept, I feel like Ireland's home. At the same time, I feel like Sydney's home too. I feel like Sydney's like kind of spiritual home,
Mm.
uh, and Australia's a spiritual home, and probably where I'll end up back at some point down the line. Um, but yeah, I think we talked about it before, but it's this concept. I think it kind of feeds back into this idea that the penance for living, around the world and enjoying it is that you're slightly fucked for life now. You've got your foot in two camps, for the rest of your life. Doesn't matter where, if you live in Sydney. If I live in Sydney, then I'm gonna miss Ireland and this side of the world. And if I live this side of the world, I'm gonna miss Sydney. And that's just the way it's unfortunately gonna be.
Yeah, it's a strange one, isn't it? It's where your patriotism sort of meets or has a sword fight with your spiritualism, I guess. It's a strange one. I certainly feel that. Like there are things that I'm really like adamant about and very British about, like 3:30 on the dot. I'm putting the kettle on. They look at me like I'm crazy in the office, but 3:30 is a great time for a cup of tea. Don't get it twisted.
Oh, you should see me getting shitty in pubs about pints of Guinness. Okay, then yeah, Jesus, there's a couple of pubs in Sydney that serve in a few dodgy ways. I've seen pints come out in carling glasses. I've seen schooners of Guinness. I've seen all sorts of horrendous stuff, and I'll get me back up. The accent will get stronger. The accent will get stronger, and I'll get paler. In the sense of a conversation. Um, but it is that I think, and I think I don't know, man. I think it's an interesting one because one of music is quite a kind of important part. Important. I'll start again. Music is quite an important thing to me because obviously I may or may not work in it. And there's always a couple of like artists that you listen to when you're homesick and whatever. And for me, there's two. There's an Irish one, it's Christy Moore. And I would listen to Christy Moore whenever I was feeling down, feeling a little bit homesick for Ireland. And I'd get him on and I'd feel even worse. And then over here, so I've come back, it's now Paul Kelly. So I'll listen to a lot of Paul Kelly and kind of miss Australia in that sense. But it's a weird dynamic. I don't know how to kind of describe it. Like it's one of those things where there's a possibility I think I'll come back to Australia at some point. But there is a possibility that I might never come back to Australia. There's no real driver for me to come back to Australia, living this side of the world. If I lived here, apart from you, obviously, if I lived here and I was just like, okay, this is where I live now, there's nothing to say that says I have to go back to Australia. Where what's really interesting, I think, is when I live in Australia and I'm kind of going, this is where I live now, then trips home are just a standard thing. Like even if you do it once every 2 years, you will come home a lot and you'll come to this side of the world a lot. Just because of the nature of it. And I don't know if there's like, because the move is still fairly fresh in my mind, but I don't know if that sense of, oh, I might never go to Australia again kind of fills me with a lot of dread, a lot of kind of fear. I'm like, I don't want that to happen. I want to go to Australia regularly, but you look like a lunatic if you're just going off to Australia every year for a holiday. It's very different dynamic in that sense. It's fine in Australia to go to Europe once a year, but if you're kind of in the UK going, I'll go to Australia again on holiday, people think you're an absolute psychopath.
Yeah, that's such an interesting way. I've never thought about it like that, but it makes perfect sense. So it's like I do understand that pilgrimage that Australians make on, virtually every year back to Europe. I get it. But yeah, you're right. If it was the other way around, you'd be like, what are you doing? Like, how much of Australia can you see? Like, I know it's massive and there's like a few things, that are like a good couple of beaches and a good couple of bars, but like it's a lot of the same, isn't it? Really, like if we're brutally honest.
I mean, Australians are built differently, and I found that out my first 6 months in Australia. I was living with a bloke, moved in with a flatmate, and he went for a holiday in France for 2 weeks. And I was like, "What? You're flying to France for 2 weeks?" The other side, I was like, if I was in Dublin now and I said I'm going to go to Australia for 2 weeks, people would think I was absolutely batshit crazy, just like mental. Just like, what do you mean you're going for 2 weeks? You're flying the other side of the world for 2 weeks. It's something wrong with you. But they're just built differently, and I guess they have to be, right? Like, if you fly west of Sydney for 6 hours, you're still in Australia. It's just it's a very different mindset. And they just seem to do it, which is good. It's why you come to London and you meet so many Australians who fly to Prague and kind of they're in Paris every weekend. They're doing all sorts of stuff, whereas we don't do that as much because the world is much smaller to them here than they are in Australia.
I wonder, based on your experience of moving around the world, everything we've just spoken about, how much do you think family would play into another move?
That's an interesting question. Again, it's a bit of a hard one, that right. So for context, you know, probably when I was in Australia, I lost two grandfathers. One died when I was just I'd moved out there pretty recently, and then one died during COVID. Um, and I obviously had a nephew who was born who I didn't meet till he was one. Um, my mother has MS as well, so she can't fly. So the chances of her ever coming to Australia, very 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 slim. Maybe a one-way trip on a boat. We did actually one time look at how we could get her out to Australia on flights that were less than 2 hours long, and we found basically 20 flights that we could get her out. We just take her a month to get there. Um, so my family never came to visit me in Australia, and I understand why because they've got stuff going on. It's a long way. People have things happening, um, and that's I guess spurred why I'm here because I want to kind of spend some more time with them. But I do think there is something in the back of my brain that's like, if I live back in Australia, then they could come out. They might come out once a year, once every 2 years, like maybe once every 3 years probably. But my little nephew could come out every summer. He could just kind of chuck him on a plane. He could come over. He could spend the summer in Australia, and he could experience something different. And he could experience going to the beach of the week, just during the week and going for swims before well, he's not going to work, but going for swims every day and kind of being outdoors and experiencing the kind of the incredible lifestyle that is ultimately Sydney. So it's one of those ones where on one hand it's like it's detrimental because you're going to see your family, you're going to see everybody less, and something will happen. That's just something will happen, and you might not make it home in time for something. And then on the other hand, it's yeah, you might not see them as regularly, but when you do see family, they'll either come to you and it'll be great, and they'll have an incredible time, and you can show them your life. And this is probably kind of that part there, like that kind of like I've had a whole life in Australia and a whole life in a different part of the world where my family have never seen it. Like they've never kind of been part of it, and it's almost like this thing that they don't know me in Australia, like they don't know me out there. Um, and I'd love to show them that. For them to experience, um, you know, some of that. Um, so you kind of have, yeah, you kind of there's pros and cons. It becomes much more if they came out to Australia or I came back to Ireland for those once every 2 year trips where you spend a month at home. Like it's much more of an intense experience, but it's much more enjoyable. And I would say it's not much more enjoyable, but it's much more you do more stuff and you kind of you're engaged that period of time. Um, so it probably balances out. I don't know. It probably kind of balances out for me a little bit. I see pros and cons to both situations. Yeah. What about you? Do you? I mean, you don't play like you're in Australia. You're kind of are you set? You're not kind of or is that a silly question to ask an expat? You're like, are you ever really set as an expat? Are you ever really like locked in somewhere?
Well, it's interesting. As I said, I sort of made my peace with being here a few years ago. I think COVID was a great settler for me, having come off the back of the 2019 back injury. 2020 and 2021 just gave me a bit more time to settle into my life and what figuring out what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go and what I wanted to be. And I think for me, I was very much still one foot in potentially coming home. And I was always like, well, maybe. And I think that extended period of time just made me go, actually, do you know what? I really like it here. And I don't see the value in me going home at all. I'm not going to have the same lifestyle. I'm not going to have the same quality of life. The things that I really value, I get to do at the drop of a hat. I can be self-sufficient here. Love being in the ocean, love climbing a mountain, like going camping, and those things are just in abundance here. So I don't think, for me, I don't think a move back to the UK is ever on the cards. But since I've in more recent times started a relationship with another human female, not another human female, but a human female. Rachel's a bit younger than me. There's about a 9 year age difference, and she hasn't lived outside of Australia. So she's a Tassie girl, and she loves Europe. So if at some point she turned around and said, I would love to go and work, live, experience Europe for an extended period of time, I'd certainly be keen. Or anywhere in the world for that matter. I think we've spoken about Japan. I think the States is probably off the cards, just given how hard it is to get working visas over there. But any other location, I think now would be the time to do it. I think that I still have enough enthusiasm and enough energy to actually manage and facilitate a move somewhere else. I think as I slowly slow down, I am finding it less and less exciting, the prospect of having to uproots, pack all my stuff up, even if that was just to go, excuse me, even if that was just to go up the road, to a new house. Like we were stung with a very tasty $200 increase on our weekly rental price this week or recently. So there was an idea that we might go and move to the Central Coast or to Ballina or Byron, and I was like, just the prospect of having to pack up my house is enough for me to just suck up this rental increase. So never say never, my friend. You never know. We might be back at some point, but who's to say that I'm here forever? I do love it here.
Has your sister and nephews been out to Australia?
Fiona brought Oscar out when he was about 11 months old, and Teddy is yet to come over. But I think you touched upon it. It'd be, yeah, like in the back of my mind, I'm really looking forward to those opportunities where, not for another 5 or 6 years, but looking forward to, Fiona popping Oscar on a plane and having him for an extended period of time, like during the Australian summer. I think that'll be like like a really fun moment for me. Like I'm really looking forward to that.
You can teach them how to park a ridiculously sized
Oh
car,
yeah.
small parking space in the eastern suburbs of Sydney. I'm sure you love it.
Yeah, I think you will. Now
Uh,
I've got a very interesting story. Now we're talking about family, and we're talking about immigration, right? That's what our podcast is about, immigration. So, have
or
you?
immigration, the
No,
M and the M.
no, immigration.
Okay.
So, as part of this, like, I was just doing some general research on immigration in general, and then where my professional and personal lives came into a somewhat of a crossroads. I've been working on a project at work that is for an expedition company, I guess you'd call them, who take people from Australia and get them onto the ice down in Antarctica. They have this fancy new ship that they're looking forward to launching later this year. And my job is to help them talk about that in market and talk about it in the way that they want to, which is around sustainability.
Are they have they named the ship yet?
They have, yes. Sorry, they're not calling it Boaty McBoatface.
I was thinking Icy McIceface, but go on.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that would also work. Sadly, it's already got a name. Anyway, so then as we're working through this, and I'm trying to blag my way onto a free $30,000+ expedition, I thought to myself, I vaguely remember being told about my mum's uncle. So this is my grandmother's brother. And this popped out of nowhere into my brain. But I was told many moons ago that my great uncle, so that his name is Anthony Louis Mazzino, has a place in Antarctica named after him. And I was like, maybe I've made that up. Maybe that seems a bit far-fetched. Anyway, so I went to the internet and it was fascinating. I found it so interesting. There was because he flew for the Indian RAF, but there was quite a bit of information on him. And through some scrolling, in the Indian Gazette, the Gazette of India, February 12th, 1966, there's a write-up of him. Squadron leader Anthony Louis Mazzino, general duties. During recent operations against Pakistan, squadron leader Anthony Louis Mazzino was the flight commander of an operational fighter Renaissance squadron. In addition to other operational missions, he led his section on 11 missions against enemy ground positions and pressed home the attacks with courage and determination against a heavy barrage of enemy fire. He undertook dangerous Renaissance missions in complete disregard of his personal safety. During one such mission, he successfully located a tank train, which was subsequently attacked by our aircraft, resulting in 25 Patton tanks being knocked down. His exemplary courage and determination have inspired the men under his command to a high sense of devotion and duty. So that's him, right? Then, I mean, that's pretty cool.
But no, that is cool. But we have probably alienated all of our Pakistani listeners with that. So we'll next week we'll have something about the Pakistanis.
Yeah. Don't worry, it's all about balance. However, then I was like, well, okay, that's cool, but where does Antarctica come in? So I looked a little bit further and I found a Wikipedia page on Mazzino Island. And that is what my great uncle has named after him, because he was, during the 60s, he was helping Australia map Antarctica and looking at the topography and looking at the geography of Antarctica, sorry. And because of his efforts and because of the work that he did, it's on the far east coast of Antarctica. It's called Mazzino Island. Anyway, that's my, and we'll throw up a cheeky link to his wiki page. But
that's cool.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. And I got to share that in the recent client meeting that I had with them, and they were most impressed.
But how did that go? They're like, nah, sorry, Rob, you're still not going though, mate. Sorry.
Yeah. Still waiting for my invite to the next Antarctic expedition.
Do you think do you think he was like, that part's called Mazzino Island over there? No, it definitely is. No, that's what it is. Yeah, like we'll just put that Mazzino and see what happens, lads. Like I'd do that. I'd be like, this place hasn't got a name though. Chris. That's what that bit over there is called, Chris.
Chris.
Actually, funny. I mean, that's an incredible story, mate. That's actually really sick. It does bring me on to just a little kind of tidbit about the names of places in Australia. How some of the places are just so badly named. Always like Mount Disappointment. It's always a fun one. Like they went up it when they looked at the view and they went, "Jeez, this is disappointing, isn't it?" Right, Mount Disappointment down the pub, lads. Come on, off we go.
Next mountain.
Yeah, right. Just John, write that down, will you? We're going to the pub now. We'll worry about wrestling later on.
It's basically a hill.
100%. And Mount Panoramic is always the other one as well. Like, Oh, you got a panoramic view from here. Great. Boom. Mount Panoramic. Boom. Next one. What have we got? Either that or named after English places.
Well, do you, I think that
Uh,
about like how like zoologists have like named certain animals as well. What was that one? Oh, it's a brown snake. Done. Next.
do you know what? Do you know what? I mean, I when I was in Sydney, I realized that a lot of places were named after English places, but a lot of places I didn't realize were English places. So I was back here recently. I've noticed there's a Sydenham. And I was like, oh, did they name that after Sid? No, they didn't. No, Chris, come on, come on, come on, be smarter, Chris. Come on, behave yourself.
It is super confusing. Like the main drag in Sydney is obviously Oxford Street, and it's the same back in the UK.
It
Like
is, and you get
lazy,
your Paddingtons,
lazy. Yeah,
Greenwich,
Dulwich Hill.
Woolwich,
Yeah,
Dulwich Hill. Dulwich Hill's a lazy one. Like, that's a really
Dulwich Hill's a
lazy one.
lazy one. So
Yeah,
lazy.
it
I think
really is.
Paddington's the laziest though, don't you? Because they basically took existing infrastructure and architecture and just went done. Good. It's good. It was good back home. It's going to be good here. And it's
Oh,
not
the
good
Surrey
here.
Hills.
It's bloody freezing in those Victorian terraces.
Yeah,
They
but you
they
know.
brought everything over except the radiators.
Mate, I feel like we could talk here all day. Let's wrap things up. Good podcast. I enjoyed that. Thank you very much, mate, and thanks to everybody else for joining us here on Here and Air. And we shall see you next time. Hey, if you liked what you heard, give us a subscribe and pop over to Here and Air on Instagram. Say hello. We'd love to hear from you. We can wrap it up there, Rob.